Most people see Sun Tzu as a military genius whose book The Art of War teaches how to win battles. His ideas are often used as lessons in strategy and victory, but Sun Tzu's real focus was the cost of war. Living in an age of constant conflict, he saw how prolonged warfare drained economies and weakened states. In many cases, the greatest threat to a nation was not the enemy, but the financial burden of war itself. A world trapped in endless war. To understand Sun Tzu's thinking, we must first understand the era in which he lived. He is believed to have written during the late spring and autumn period and the early warring states era, roughly between the 6th and 5th centuries BCE. At the time, China was not a unified empire. Instead, it was divided into numerous competing kingdoms, each struggling to dominate the others. War was almost constant. Rulers built larger armies, forged temporary alliances, and launched campaigns against rival states year after year. Battles were no longer small aristocratic clashes fought by chariots and elite warriors. Instead, warfare was becoming something far larger and more complex. States began mobilizing huge infantry forces. Armies required weapons, armor, transport, and enormous supplies of food. Entire populations were taxed and organized to support military operations. What had once been limited conflicts between nobles was evolving into large-scale economic undertakings. Every time a ruler sent troops into the field, he was committing enormous financial resources. Armies had to be fed, equipped, and transported. Craftsmen produced weapons. Farmers lost labor while serving in the military. War was no longer just a matter of courage or tactics. It had become a massive strain on the state's economy. Sun Tzu saw clearly that many rulers failed to understand this. The hidden cost of ancient warfare. Popular imagination often portrays ancient warfare as heroic and dramatic, but in reality, it was dominated by logistics. The moment an army began moving, expenses multiplied. Soldiers needed food and clothing, horses required grain and care, wagons had to transport supplies across long distances, blacksmiths repaired weapons, and workers maintained equipment. A campaign lasting only a few months could severely weaken a smaller state's treasury. If fighting dragged on for a year or longer, even powerful kingdoms could face financial crisis. And yet, many rulers continued to wage long and expensive wars. They believed victory alone justified the cost. Sun Tzu saw the situation differently. To him, victory meant little if achieving it destroyed the state's financial stability. In modern language, he understood economic sustainability. War as a financial risk. Unlike many thinkers of his time, Sun Tzu approached warfare almost like a risk analyst. Rather than celebrating heroic battles, he examined the underlying mechanics that determined whether a war was worth fighting. He asked questions that sound surprisingly modern. How much will this campaign cost? How long can the state sustain it? What happens to the economy if the war continues? Will victory bring more benefits than the damage already done? For Sun Tzu, war was a dangerous instrument that had to be used carefully. It could defend a nation, but it could also destroy it. This is why one of the most important lines in The Art of War appears at the very beginning. War is of vital importance to the state. The word vital is significant. Sun Tzu was not glorifying war. He was warning that it was powerful enough to determine whether a nation survived or collapsed. Winning without fighting. Perhaps the most famous idea associated with Sun Tzu is the statement, "The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting." Many readers treat this as a philosophical statement about strategy or psychological warfare. But it also contains a practical economic insight. If a ruler can achieve his goals through diplomacy, alliances, intelligence, or intimidation, he avoids the enormous financial costs of battle. Armies remain intact, resources remain available, and the economy remains stable. In other words, the cheapest victory is the best victory. Sun Tzu understood that prolonged warfare drains resources faster than it produces results. A campaign that drags on for years weakens agriculture, disrupts trade, and exhausts the population. Even if a state eventually wins the war, it may find itself too damaged to benefit from that victory. The real engine of war. Much of The Art of War focuses on practical matters that modern readers sometimes overlook. Sun Tzu spends considerable time discussing supply systems, transportation, and the cost of feeding armies. He warns rulers that moving troops far from home dramatically increases expenses. Transporting grain and equipment across long distances consumes resources and burdens the treasury. The longer an army remains in the field, the more pressure it places on the economy. Farmers are taken away from agriculture. Taxes increase to pay for military operations. Local markets struggle to supply food and materials. Sun Tzu's conclusion is simple. Wars must be short and efficient. Commanders who prolong conflicts waste the nation's wealth and weaken its ability to defend itself later. In his view, logistics were not a secondary concern, they were the foundation of strategy itself. Intelligence as the cheapest weapon. Another area where Sun Tzu demonstrated remarkable insight was intelligence gathering. In modern terms, we might call it information advantage. Sun Tzu argued that good intelligence could prevent costly mistakes. Knowing the enemy's plans allowed a commander to avoid traps, choose favorable moments to strike, and minimize unnecessary losses. Spies, scouts, and informants were therefore essential tools. Compared with the expense of maintaining large armies, intelligence networks were relatively inexpensive. A single piece of reliable information could prevent an entire campaign from failing. Sun Tzu believed knowledge was not just valuable, it was economically efficient. Speed and efficiency. Another famous principle in the art of war is the importance of speed. Many interpret this as a call for aggressive action. However, Sun Tzu's reasoning was more practical. Speed reduces cost. The faster a campaign concludes, the less strain it places on the economy. Soldiers return home sooner, agricultural work resumes, and the treasury avoids prolonged expenditure. Delays, hesitation, and drawn-out battles increase the financial burden. Sun Tzu therefore encouraged commanders to act decisively when opportunities appeared. Quick victories preserved resources and prevented wars from spiraling into long-term disasters. The economic logic of strategy. Seen from this perspective, many of Sun Tzu's ideas take on a different meaning. His emphasis on deception, maneuvering, and psychological pressure was not just about clever tactics. These methods allowed commanders to achieve results without paying the high price of direct confrontation. In modern terms, Sun Tzu was advocating cost-effective strategy. He believed that rulers should always consider the opportunity cost of war. Every decision made on the battlefield consumed resources that might be needed elsewhere. A state that spent too much on war risked weakening its own foundations. Lessons confirmed by history. History repeatedly proved the logic behind Sun Tzu's thinking. Many kingdoms in ancient China collapsed after exhausting their resources in long wars. Massive sieges and drawn-out campaigns drained treasuries and sparked internal unrest. States that managed their resources more carefully often survived longer. This pattern did not end in ancient times. Throughout modern history, powerful nations have faced similar problems. Military campaigns that lasted longer than expected placed enormous pressure on national economies. Wars in the 20th century demonstrated how quickly financial systems could be strained by prolonged conflict. Sun Tzu would likely have recognized the pattern immediately. A strategy that still shapes the world. Although Sun Tzu lived more than 2,000 years ago, many of his ideas remain relevant today. Modern warfare increasingly relies on tools that aim to achieve results without large-scale destruction. Cyber operations, intelligence gathering, economic sanctions, and strategic deterrence are all methods designed to influence outcomes while avoiding the enormous cost of direct military confrontation. These strategies reflect the same principle Sun Tzu emphasized centuries ago: achieve maximum effect with minimal expenditure. The real lesson of Sun Tzu. Ultimately, Sun Tzu was not writing a book about glory or conquest. He was offering rulers a warning. War is one of the most expensive decisions a state can make. It consumes resources, disrupts economies, and places enormous pressure on society. If leaders treat war casually or pursue it out of pride, they risk destroying the very nation they are trying to protect. Sun Tzu believed the strongest rulers were not those who fought the most battles, but those who understood when conflict was necessary and when it was not. In his view, the greatest strategic achievement was not defeating enemies on the battlefield. It was preserving the stability and prosperity of the state. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the hidden economics of history, make sure to like and subscribe for more stories where money, power, and history collide.